Andriy Zagorodnyuk is a Ukrainian entrepreneur and politician. From 2015 to 2017, Andriy headed the Reform Project Office at the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. He was Minister of Defense of Ukraine from August 2019 to March 2020. He has also studied at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv and also graduated from Warwick University and Oxford University. He also became an advisor to the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, after he was elected president in 2019. After his resignation as Minister of Defense, Andriy became the chairman of the Center for Defense Strategies. The CDS is a Ukrainian security think tank involved in security studies, defense policy, research, and advocacy. Before we jump into the interview, please do check you are subscribed to the channel, and thank you to everybody who is supporting the channel and especially the documentary project that we are funding at the moment. Andriy, let's jump in. Welcome to Silicon Curtain.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure to be with you here.
Well, we're speaking on the week which sees the anniversary of the Budapest Memorandum, and it seems that memories are short. People are falling over themselves to suggest negotiations once again with Putin. What is the danger of this, and what is the risk of the delusional thinking that actually it's possible to have some form of legally binding permanent treaty with Russia, especially under Putin?
Right. Lots of questions in the same one. But so speaking of memorandum, yesterday I had a chance to actually hold the original in my hands. It was a remarkable experience because actually it's apparently it has even discrepancies with translations, but generally it's a very shallow, very short document, and obviously we have to. It's one of the hardest lessons the country can go through is to sign a paper, count on the paper, and then realize that paper doesn't mean much, like the document, which for decades Ukrainian politicians and Ukrainian government officials have thought that this was the protection from actually wars, because we realize that there are only several countries which can have wars against Ukraine, and Russia was a co-signer of the memorandum. So many politicians for decades sort of discarded that option completely. That led to a problem of many people in population of Ukraine for decades, thinking that there are no threats. So basically, a threat kind of analysis of people, like subconscious threat analysis, was that there are literally no threats. So Ukrainian army wasn't expected to fight on its own territory, and people lived without actually even looking into the questions of the armed forces readiness, armed forces condition, and so on. So Ukraine was known to be inherit a massive arsenal from the Soviet Union, and lots of people thought that this is completely needless. So people actually welcomed, the shrinking of Ukrainian armed forces. They welcomed closing of the bases. Many people said that the factories which produced arms and various weapon systems and other military equipment, they were considered as not needed, and so on and so on. So it was a very, very difficult process to sort of come back to the reality that actually all of that might be needed again, and that actually the vast stockpiles of Ukraine has been sold for a while into different markets, and that was required again. And in 2014, government had stopped selling the stockpiles to anywhere, but it was already quite late, and a lot of stuff has gone. Why I'm saying this now is because that sort of complacency of thinking that there are threats are not real, that the country is protected by something, some kind of paper, some kind of document, means that people shouldn't look into the armed forces. People shouldn't think that the defense budget is something really important. That the defense budget could be, or defense assets could be sort of rerouted to something else. It could be extremely misleading and can cost extremely dearly. And that is the message to many people in Europe, which are believing that the fact that that they're in Europe, actually, that means that the security and defense is not their problem anymore, because it's all done, it's all sorted, and Russia will never attack them, and so on. They should think again, because that's exactly where we came from, and unfortunately learning hard way. So, learn on our mistakes. Now, regarding the negotiations with Putin, the truth is that there are a whole number of levels in answering this question. So first of all, we should understand the motivation and the mentality of Russian current regime, and that motivation is based on a massive feeling of insecurity which they have about themselves. So they think that, first of all, Western nations are thinking how to reduce their importance and reduce their influence, and hopefully, I mean, as they kind of claim, hopefully to destroy Russia completely. But more importantly, they also have insecurity about their own position, because they think that if they are not competitive on a global stage, if they cannot dictate their terms and the way how they do business to outside, Russian people eventually will not want to live under such regime. And successful Ukraine as a Western nation is a great concern to them, because that they would think that that would be an example to many other people in Russia with claiming the democracy, and they do believe that under democratic rule Russia will stop existing. And also that NATO is a massive threat to them, because expansion of NATO in whatever way is threatening their position in the region, which means to enhancing Ukraine's prospects of becoming a successful Western nation, and as such threaten Russian basically dominance in the region, and particularly dominance of the regime in Russian society and Russian sort of life. So the point is that they believe in these positions so much that they were able to transfer that vision to many people, including Western politicians. So for a while, lots of Western politicians were saying, well, Russia has legitimate concerns, and if they have legitimate concerns, we need to kind of address them, and so on and so on. The point is that those concerns were considered legitimate by Russian government, but they're completely illegitimate from the point of international law and from the point of any sort of normal cohabitation of nations, in the same sort of same space, because essentially what they said is that they can easily dictate how Ukraine should live, what Ukraine should be, and so on and so on. So essentially, like interfering into the other countries' matters. Well, needless to say, they don't consider Ukraine as a other country. They consider Ukraine as a something which happened by accident, and but that's a very I should say that's a very useful, comfortable. Sorry, that's very convenient. Sorry, that convenient understanding. And of course, you never can distinguish whether what they say they actually believe themselves, because we don't know. We don't know what they believe themselves, and we of course understand that that's what they're saying in order for other people to believe in that. So they want to sort of impose that notion that Ukraine is not a real nation to the other people. What they think themselves is actually doesn't matter. They may believe that, they may understand that Ukraine has become a completely independent nation already after 30 years of independence. And yes, Ukrainian nation obviously exists for many, many, many centuries, and so on. So to say that this is not a real nation that doesn't make any sense. However, they do push that, and to many people who don't understand this, and for them it's maybe, I mean, they don't know what to think about that. So it's a matter of their propaganda is spreading, as much as it can. Now, with such an approach, with the understanding that that battle is existential also to Russia, and they believe that they must only destroy Ukraine, and that's the only way for them to save their domination in their region and basically save their positions. It's very difficult to find what in the theory of negotiations is called zone of possible agreement. So essentially, in order for you to negotiate with someone, you need to find an area where you can still live with each other and somehow, possibly theoretically, find a common ground and basically say, okay, I'll compromise here, you'll compromise here. But after that, we'll find that zone of possible agreement, and then we can keep on going somehow, and so on. So for Russia, for Putin's regime, zone of possible agreement is that when on the other side of the agreement, Ukraine does not exist. That's why they don't want to negotiate with Ukraine, because even negotiating with Ukraine assumes that it exists as a legitimate side of negotiations. And they're saying, no, 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 Ukraine is not a legitimate side of negotiations. Because Ukraine is not, we don't want you. Well, you cannot negotiate with someone where you're pushing the idea that that someone is not existing, right? So you should, in order to discuss such a scenario, you should negotiate with a third party with who you will agree that that subject is non-existent or shouldn't be existent, right? So that's the only way for you to actually even approach that, because how can I, for example, I'm talking to you, right, and Jonathan, and I'm saying, Jonathan, so we have a negotiations, but my key point is that you, as Jonathan, is not a real person, how we can negotiate from that perspective? It just doesn't make sense. So that's why Russia is pushing this idea that Ukraine is not a legitimate party for negotiations. And that's why they're trying to negotiate with Trump, like they will, or with others. Is simply for that matter. Now, how we can find a zone of possible agreement with such a strategy and such a vision? I mean, I don't think it's possible, and that's the biggest issue. I'm not sure if answers that your question, but
It
basically, then the
does.
questions about the details of these discussions are not that much relevant, simply because and now the only thing what may happen is that negotiations potentially can be imposed onto Ukraine. So, for instance, United States can say, well, there are two options. One option is that you are becoming a part of some process, and the other option is that you're receiving no help at all. And then Ukraine will have to sit down and we'll have to discuss something, uh, clearly understanding that we will not convince Putin that we suddenly have a right to exist. Um, Also, there are a lot of people in the world who are saying that the peace has to be given a chance. Like in a song, give peace a chance. So that's a very difficult issue to deal with, because if you disagree with that, that means that you almost don't want peace. And as a nation, Ukrainians want peace more than anything else in the world. I mean, there is absolutely nothing we want more than peace. So then these people saying, okay, well, if you want peace, why don't you give peace a chance in terms of the some kind of a negotiation process? Because if you close the door to negotiation process, that you give no chance to peace, and it's quite tough to deal with that. And that's why, and for example, if you are dealing with a security analysis and you're working in a war analysis, you live in an environment where you understand what Putin's situation is. But if you're outside of that process, then you not necessarily think about this every day. And then for you, it may be weird that a peace-loving nation, a nation which craves for peace, doesn't want to get into the peace process.
I can
And so
imagine.
that's why.
Yeah, I can imagine Chancellor Schultz is probably playing that song, "Give Peace a Chance," on his iPod, but
Oh,
give tourists a
lots
chance.
of people do.
Um, I
Yeah,
mean,
lots of people do. Yeah,
this is a real
yeah.
challenge,
Please
isn't
go
it?
ahead.
Because if you pay attention to Putin's speeches in 2007 in Munich, and indeed the speech he gave in 2014, and another one he's just given in Sochi now in 2024, he pronounced the intent to create to pull down, tear down the world order, the Yalta world order declared after the Second World War. Now he is seeming to claim that this has succeeded, that this marks the end of liberal hegemony. There's something of a sense of victory in the speech that he's just given, which for those who are watching, the war unfold, seem remarkable. He's turned eastern Ukraine into a wasteland. He's on course to have caused the deaths of 1 million Russians, and he's about halfway through destroying the stocks of Soviet weapons. And yet there seems to be a triumphalism in his speech. How do you explain that? Because that does not bode well for these theoretical negotiations.
No, but we need to understand that, and your channel is a lot about the information war, and so we need to think about this like whatever he says publicly is part of information war. And so, in terms of information and information war against the West, against obviously Ukraine, and obviously against its own people, because in any totalitarian regime, government is regularly, routinely applying information war methods and against its own population. So that's his audience is like, I mean, is all the same. So what he's saying every time when he speaks publicly is not what, first of all, is not necessarily what he thinks. Secondly, is not necessarily what reflects the reality, but merely it's the image he wants to project to reach his strategic goals. So basically, if we assume that he is a strategic communicator, which he is, he has strategy and he tries to achieve strategy with communication means. So whatever he's trying to do is basically achieving strategic goals by the means of communication, apart from other means. So what he wants to project right now is he wants to project strength and success. And frankly speaking, he succeeds in that to a great extent, because if you look at the mathematics of what is happening on the ground, his casualties, his performance in the front line in terms of losing tens of thousands of people to get one village, in terms of the, yes, totally destroying his economy, most likely for some substantial period of time, switching the whole economy to the war footing, creating all kinds of problems because of this, and so on and so on, and basically spending most of his sovereign fund to support that image of success, and basically that everything is going okay, and so on and so on. So I mean, if you are a resident of the democratic nation, you would never call that a success. You would call that a disaster. You would call that a complete disaster of getting into the war, which you cannot win. And clearly, Ukraine exists because his ultimate goal of destroying Ukraine failed. Ukraine exists. Ukraine is much more distant from Russia than ever in its history, and Ukraine is much closer to the West than ever in its history. And all these discussions about returning Ukraine under the Russian umbrella are failed completely, and actually created a massive opposite effects all around the world. Now, but he cannot just say that, because that would kill him, in terms of the strategic communication. So he's promoting the idea that they're actually winning. Now, what is true there? The fact is that communication works, because you could see there's a lot of Western observers. I'm not even talking about the non-Western countries observers, which are saying, yeah, Russia is succeeding, Russia is winning. There's a lot of commentators who are saying, yeah, everything is fine for Russia, totally missing these mathematics, like at all. But they just keep on saying that, yeah, Russia is actually having upper hand, and so on and so on. So now we have to live with that situation. Secondly, is the fact that the world, and that's a very unfortunate fact, and we need to do something about that. But it's very difficult. The fact that the world now comprehending that despite of the massive investments of hundreds of billions of investments, of the support which was announced to be like as long as it takes, and so on and so on, with a huge coalition, Ramstein meetings every couple months with a lot of different weapons coming, the West cannot sort of abrupt, like clearly make sure that Russia loses. And the horrible thing is that West actually can, and West actually could, but chosen not to because of the escalation risks and all kinds of other fears, particularly in the case of White House administration, which, among other things, sort of set its controlling system over the Ramstein format. So basically, no other nation of the coalition can provide the weapons unless White House administration is supporting that idea. So now the message is like, yeah, you see, Russia could do horrible things, destroy the city of Mariupol, destroy city of Bakhmut, destroy cities of Severodonetsk and all other cities, and little towns and villages and so on and so on. Kill that many people, kidnap that many children, open up torture chambers in every little town, and do it completely openly. They never hid. Unlike the war of 2014, 2021, where they were continuing as a mantra that they're not there, which was, obviously that was lie, but they didn't care. They kind of kept saying that. Now they're saying, yeah, we do this. We do this. That's us. No problem. So despite of all that openness in committing these horrible crimes, they still hugging half of the and greeting half of the global leaders, and that includes NATO countries such as Turkey, where they are very friendly, at least visually, with the leader. That includes NATO countries such as Hungary, that includes Slovakia, and the U.S. president-elect is saying that he has good relations with Putin, which means that he wants to use these good relations, and so on. So after all that, they end up with still being able to trade oil, still being able to buy components, Western components, and so on, and receiving the support at least from number of countries, and so on. So from that perspective, they are kind of they failed in destroying Ukraine, but at the same time they succeeded in showing the world, at least for the moment, that showing the world that that sort of approach of destroying the way how the world operates can be actually successful, and they can get away with that. I can and more importantly, they are able to do that with projecting the image of the fear of escalation, of nuclear escalation. I cannot imagine, frankly speaking, where we're heading to with that. If that idea, if that notion actually gets into the heads of the global leaders, I don't know how the world's going to look like in 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, even 10 years from now, because we cannot imagine if the if the world order, which created after World War II, and international law and so on, no longer means anything. I mean, I don't think any fantasy is enough to sort of to come up with what's going to happen. So actually, yeah, that's quite dangerous. I
There's a
hope the
clear
world will awaken.
implication. I mean, to jump in, there's a clear implication here because
Sure.
Zelensky said it's either NATO or nukes, but actually, you know, looking at that, parsing what's happened recently, there's a real risk here, isn't there, that Article 5 will not be a deterrent for Putin. There's a real risk that Article 5 may even be infringed, or Russia can escalate grey zone warfare up to the threshold of Article 5 to an extremely serious level and have no serious cost or repercussions for it. So actually,
Yeah.
joining NATO is not a real deterrent at this point. Only the acquisition of nuclear weapons by Ukraine, as well as being armed to the teeth conventionally, these are the only deterrents for an independent Ukraine, surely, at this point.
I agree with the arms conventionally. Regarding the nuclear, we don't have those ambitions, at least, in this reality where we are right now. But the fact that you mentioned that is already terrifying. The fact that you are returning to the deterrence principles of the early Cold War and saying that's the only thing which can save. It means that the security architecture, which was built carefully, and worked for decades, starting from 1950s, when it became clear that NATO means something powerful, that is being revised today, and it's a serious danger for the whole world.
Let's turn to internal matters. 'Cause I know we've only got a few minutes left, and there's a million different angles. First of all, we have the announcement of a surge in military supplies, which Jake Sullivan has been put in charge of. That doesn't necessarily fill everybody with confidence who has been watching the performance over the last 3 years. But anyway, is it your view that it's crucial for Ukraine in this period of transition to get as many supplies as it can from the US? But what also needs to happen to keep Ukraine in the fight, to ensure that the incremental gains of territory that Russia is making do not turn into more than the sort of increments that we currently see? Are there reforms taking place that are required there in the way the army operates? I notice in particular, for example, that a new commander of ground forces has been appointed,
Right.
which perhaps hints at some of these restructuring and reforms.
Yes, the reforms are, of course, is an important part, and definitely, as Sir Charles Darwin said, the ones who survives is the ones who adapts the first. So basically, not the one who's strongest. So the adaptation is actually absolutely a key thing. It's whoever doesn't adapt dies, and that also applies to countries in war. Because the changing nature of the war, we could see massive changes. So nothing which been applied in 2020, early 2022 is perhaps the majority of conventions and doctrines are no longer relevant to that extent as they were back then. Um, the thing is that we need to, like, survival of Ukraine in these changing times. I mean, has to be considered as a kind of immediate question. Immediate question. So what happens within the next couple of months, and then what happens over a longer period of time. So in the next couple of months, the biggest risk is that the new administration will take time to decide on the new policy towards Ukraine. And that time, Ukraine may have the gap with the capabilities, with the supplies, and during that time, Russia can use that gap in order to enforce its potential negotiation positions. And again, we discussed the chances for real negotiations, but the negotiations for the sake of buying time can happen. They could be imposed on Ukraine, and Russia can take them in order to show that they are, like, basically Minsk process. So negotiate for sake of negotiating, for sake of buying time, and for sake of showing the world that yes, we are actually good guys, and so on and so on. So Russia can do that. But meanwhile, they will not stop attacking. And the question is Ukraine protected against that period of time? But then, whatever happens over this short period of time, then there would be a long-term question. So, what is the U.S. policy towards Ukraine and towards this war? How Europe can pick up if U.S. policy is not adequate for the challenge? And whether UK and other, let's say, how EU can pick up, and generally Europe in general, including UK and non-EU countries, and what the world can do. And these questions are still hanging. They're still unanswered. There's no policy of US except for statements which we all heard about, like wishing to finish the war, which we all support. Obviously, we also want the war to end. But question is, what comes after that statement? So what exactly is going to happen? And also what game Europe is going to play in this? And there are very serious statements that Europe is considering, enhancing its role. But as we all know, between the statements and the actual actions and actually equipment coming to the ground on the front line, sometimes there is a massive gap, and that is extremely dangerous. So that's where the key risks are.
I'm sure there's many, many things we could dive into there, including the reforms within Ukraine itself and removing the sort of some of the Soviet mindset that still persists amongst certain battalion commanders and so on. Those are probably issues that require a longer conversation. The last one for me, though, here. Is it time now for Europe and the UK to contemplate boots on the ground, at least to secure Ukraine's borders, not necessarily in combat roles, and enforcing a no-fly zone?
Uh, that's great question. So to very quickly, I mean, I suggest we have a different conversation about that because those discussions happen, and there's articles being published as we speak about this, suggesting that. My personal opinion, it's not going to help. Let me explain why. So first of all, boots on the ground, meaning land forces stepping into this. That's usually what is meant by that. So which means that the infantry or some machinery on the ground is actually moving and playing some role. So without getting into the ability to get into the fight, so which is called rules of engagement, and the potential for combat engagement, those troops will be of no value. So essentially, the presence is not going to stop. Presence of some other troops is not going to stop the war. Secondly, we're talking about a front line of 1,500 kilometers and potential another 1,500 kilometers. So imagine that force which would actually protect that length. These are the war is not just on land. The war is in multidimensional space, including air. So question is, if these boots are standing on the ground on the front line and just observing how the drones are flying on top of them, and then how rockets are flying on top of the drones, and how the aviation is working, what these boots are going to do? Not much. So the question is, like, to build a deterrence, the one needs to understand the threats, and the threats now are not lying simply in the force moving on land. And then the question, of course, is about the ability of these boots to be that effective, because, as you know, there's not that much equipment left in Europe as well. I mean, there's not that much of the shells, ammunition, artillery, and so on and so on. So I'm not sure Europe has the capacity to stop Russia, even if wish so. Closing the sky and donating or helping with the Air Force, it's completely different story. I do believe that this is a way to look at that, because that's a biggest shortcoming of Ukrainian capabilities, is air power. And yes, I would look at that much closer.
Well, there's plenty for a future conversation. I know you've got a million things to do. I'm very grateful to you for spending the time talking to me, Andriy. It's been a huge pleasure.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, great to see you. Thank you.
And yeah, I hope to repeat that in future. Thank you.
Thank you.